So that was trend number 2 globally. Whoa. Must go on diet. To have space between this and stomach. Excellent. Okay, so number 3 was talent acquisition. How many of you have got a big challenge with getting the right talent on board? Yeah? I think Pat Lencioni, when we were in ISA, said, the war for talent is over and talent won. So we're kind of like in a bit of a challenge from that perspective. So talent acquisition, number 3 in the Middle East, number 3 globally. Basically, the careers and learning will help this. If you can show that there's a career and a learning path, it certainly helps with the talent acquisition. But what they're also saying in Bersin is the employment brand, your employee value proposition, needs to now be highly visible digitally. It's no longer good enough for you to be able to show it to candidates as they come in to your organization. It's something that they need to be able to find online. And they need to find it that you look really, really attractive, even if they're not looking right now to move. You become one of those employers that they're following. You need to be leveraging new technology. And in the Bersin report, it talks about a lot of the platforms that are now coming in place, including LinkedIn, for you to be able to leverage technology to find those employees. A little stat I love, job postings on Facebook that feature videos receive 36% more applications. Okay, so how we find jobs, and in fact what they're saying about talent acquisition now is I'll find you, you won't find me. So what are you doing to be found in the market out there from an employee perspective? And also job descriptions are changing. It needs to include the needs of the candidate. You'll get 3 times more applications if a candidate sees something about what they'll get. And I think that alludes to what Carol was saying. It's not just about what you need from me, it's actually the other side. What will I get from that side? But the Bersin report showed that 81% of organizations aren't good at managing talent sharing in the organization. Go back to that organization structure into agile teams, into multiple agile teams. We're not good at saying, yeah, if you've got a talented person sitting in Department B, sure you can use them in Department C. We're like, they're my people. So we've got to change our structure for talent to be able to move around within an organization. 92% aren't good at managing crowdsourcing. So talent acquisition has gone beyond your employees to crowdsourcing and outsourcing and being in a situation to use talent beyond everybody that's employed. 94% haven't mastered games and simulations for assessment. Those are a few of the trends that they're moving towards that I think will help. One of the things I love about the Bersin report is at the end of each chapter explaining what's not working, they kind of like give you a start here list. Okay, so these are the things that you can start with. So that also helps if you've identified your priorities in your organization and it's like, well, where do we start? They've even given you a quick reference guide for you can actually start saying, all right, well, at least we can employ some of this. So for me, it really did become, not a boring white paper to read, but a really useful tool for you to get to. Okay, I'm going to get through to the other thing that they're talking about, employee experience. We had that quite low, I think, on a few of the charts. People thought, oh, culture's gone, engagement's gone. It's this wrapped up thing together. Just like many of you have moved from customer satisfaction to customer experience, that's the expectation. We're moving from employee satisfaction to employee experience. The whole thing makes sense, hey? So I'm reading it, I'm going like, why didn't we think of that together? Bringing together the entire employee journey and seeing, just like many of you in organizations have done a customer journey, have you done an employee journey? Have you thought about all of those points of contact and what the experience is like at each of those? This is really central because it pulls in careers and learning, it pulls in how they work in agile teams, it pulls in kind of like how they get found and the talent acquisition. So that culture and engagement wrapped into employee engagement. But it also goes beyond that. They're actually saying it's about measurement too, which is one of the reasons why we like what Exonify are doing is how can you measure things. It's going from really kind of like looking at health, fitness, and well-being all the way through to getting people capable of doing peak performance. I love that word, peak performance. Are you at a point where your employees can really deliver peak performance and engagement because they have the right resources, they're fit and healthy, We understand all of that. And I think that's a good move in Dubai. Dubai has started to see a lot more around well-being. Yeah? The happiness move, but also the fitness, the expectations that people are healthy. How many of you got some kind of well-being or, health at work kind of component in play? Okay, all right. And how many of you are still doing something now around the happiness and that whole drive towards happiness? Yeah, okay. So again, I think this is just in that whole, is really going from wellness to well-being to performance. And again, if you aren't on that to begin with, what's great here is you can do some leapfrogs. That's what this gives you, is how do we jump ahead? Remember, you'll get these slides, so we'll give you absolutely everything you're seeing today. Okay, number 1 in the Middle East, number 5 globally, performance management. How many of you, and be honest now, I want an honest show of hands, still have an annual, biannual, or quarterly performance appraisal system? Okay. How many of you don't have one at all? I forgot to ask that question. I'm assuming if you're in the room that we've got something in place. So there's a huge focus on here, basically saying, I think in 2015, the Bersin report said 82% of companies said performance management systems as they exist now are not worth the time. Okay? Managers don't like the time, employees don't like the time, nobody's improving and getting to peak performance as a result of it. It's actually something we've created in our industry to help kind of like track where everybody is. And so the critical goal that Bersin highlight in here is how do we devise ways to align individual performance more closely with business outcomes. And business outcomes don't always wait for the end of the year. Because if we get to the end of the year, it's too late to actually say, oh, now in February what you should have done is X. So it's about frequency. And how do you create that frequency of regular frequent check-ins? And the battle still, I asked actually Heather from Bersin, have you found a brilliant platform that now allows you to frequently do performance reviews and capture the data and do all of that? They said there isn't one yet. Lots of people are working on it, but there isn't one yet that's necessarily come out that has kind of like way ahead of all of the others. So it's an interesting space to watch. But while we're waiting for the technology, we actually need to change the behavior. Yeah? We need our managers to give more frequent feedback. And certainly employees, all of us, I mean, they say it's a lot of the millennials, but I think all of us would love to be told more frequently how we're doing, good and bad. Yeah? But the millennials particularly are like, how am I doing? 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 And you're going, wait for the quarterly review. Okay? So it's just not, it's not good enough. And so this, for me, I like the fact that it's number 1 in the Middle East. I think it's one of our biggest challenges, not just technology-wise, but behaviorally. We need to catch up with that. And there's an awful lot they talk about in here about how you could just start implementing clear expectations. It's one of the gaps. In organization design, as well as in performance management, part of the reason why there's a problem is people don't know actually what's expected of them. And we don't have peer accountability. Okay? So peer accountability becomes another thing that we could start saying, if I'm going to work in an agile team, and the team knows exactly what they have to achieve, then I should be holding each other accountable. I don't need a boss to come in and tell me whether the team achieved the goals or not. Suddenly you start changing the makeup. So you can see how actually all these things are really interlinked. If you start creating agile teams, you've got to change the way you performance manage them, and then you've got to change that there isn't a boss in that agile team. It's actually an agile team. Hi, how are you doing? Great. So performance management, really key. Leadership. This was a bit of a scary chapter. Don't read the last page. So it really talked about the way we traditionally develop leaders. And part of what I love about my job that Matt highlighted is going out and exploring what's new and trying to be the disruptors rather than the disrupted. And what it talks about is that we are, in the next 3 to 5 years, going to have to change the way we train our leaders. Okay? The faster we can learn to do that well, the better. And it's something that at the moment we're investing significantly in to change the way that the leadership journey as many of you'll know it, or GDP or MDP, is actually designed and evolved because it has to become more about solving business challenges. It has to become more of an experience that actually makes you feel like you're in the real workplace while you're learning some of the business skills or leadership skills that you can do. It has to be now include how do you build and lead teams rapidly, because that's going to be a new skill that perhaps historically was hidden somewhere in that learning. How do you keep people connected and engaged when they're going to go through 6 months and want a 40 grand increase? How do you, 15 seconds of quiet was pretty good, I thought, by the way, Carol. I was kind of like 15 minutes of quiet, I think would have been for me. They need to be able to learn to drive innovation and learning towards continuous improvement. And they need resilience. And in fact, they say leaders of the future will be better risk takers. We have to, because we want people to innovate. And they'll have digital capability. I was all right with all the others, and then it was like I need to be a digital leader. They actually need to understand how technology and the digital world is going to interface. They're going to have to think differently, act differently, and react differently. And so it challenges us as a company, Biz Group, working with Exonify and others, TTRO, to change the way we do leadership training. Because actually the old way is now the old way. And so watch this space, because I think that's going to be something we need your involvement in, because it's going to have to become way more a collaborative effort to actually make it relevant to business. Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting topic, digital leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still, for me, it's kind of a grey area.
Fuzzy.
In terms of my understanding of what it is.
Absolutely.
I want to know what your feeling is towards it.
And we're going to go into a load of questions now. I should have said up front that we were going to try and get through this and make sure we had sufficient time for questions, but you're actually exactly at the questions time, so well done. But let's stick on, you were obviously, that 50 dirhams I owe you is on your chair now. So we asked the same question of Keva in ISA, actually. So what is digital leadership? And I'm going to kind of like talk to some of this. We have to think differently. A digital leader needs to conceptualize possibilities in a virtual world. So they're going to actually have to manage this ever-increasing complexity and try and find ways to make things simple, despite the fact that we've got cognitive overload. Yeah, we're all overloaded at the moment. So the digital leader is going to have to be saying, okay, how do I cut through all of that and get to some of that simplicity? They have to think about new ways of doing things. They're not waiting for the other department to decide that. They need to be thinking like that already. How do I connect these dots? And they actually need to make decisions quickly without all the information sometimes, okay? So they have to think differently. They have to we've also got to teach them, I suppose, within your organization, is there a freedom in a framework? We have to change policies so that we can allow people to be thinking differently. I mean, if I think many of the big organizations I've interacted with are, well, you have to speak to IT if you want to do something around that, and then nothing ever happens because they've got a big long list of things that now you're not allowed to do, and we're going to be teaching managers to be thinking a little bit differently on how they access things. So there's a great chart in here. What Keva said to us when we challenged this was, I don't know how we're going to get people there yet. It's kind of like this, we're expecting digital leaders. I think we're just expecting people to be a little bit more savvy, not that they know all the technology. And Carol, you might want to jump in with your perception of what this is, but they're just people that recognize I can stay connected with everything without needing to be completely in control of every person and everything they're doing.
Do you think that some of that takes place, though, just simply by having millennials in the organization? So, for example, we've got a millennial in our marketing department, and that person is pushing social media and different ways of connecting for the sales teams and the other teams, because that's driving business, and so that encourages and almost forces, in some ways, older individuals to then interact, and they have to learn that, and that impacts the other departments, because then they start getting information and they've got to collaborate across teams. So, I mean, as millennials become more experienced and move into leadership positions, and as those people enter organizations and almost drive the change, need, it's almost coming from the bottom rather than coming
exactly right. That is precisely what's going on. And the only, suggestion I would say to folks is don't clamp down on it. Don't be afraid and stop people using free tools sometimes like Slack for communication. Your younger folks who are always online, always living a digital life, are going to be using things whether you like it or not. And so your mindset should be, how do we harness the best of that to move the business forward? And don't have that mindset of just clamping down on it. Things will bubble up and happen organically. And your job should be open and aware so that, if the odd thing does happen that isn't aligned with corporate policy or whatever, you can address it. But have the mindset of being open and allow the best tools to emerge that really will be the ones that your team is using, regardless.
So it's difficult though, I think, isn't it? Because we feel that uncomfortability that they're ahead. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing in this part of the world where as they start to come through with tools, that command and control comfort factor disappears.
And how do you harness that and especially in an organization where you have different offices, different jurisdictions, different countries, and you've got something going on over here, and you've got something going on over here, and then you've got maybe a training and development leader at the head office over here who's putting together some sort of matrix for development. How do you harness all these things to drive that up so that it is a sort of constantly moving forward process rather than a clunky, well, we've done this, these guys are ahead, these guys are behind, the strategy here isn't coming out for another 6 months. Mm-hmm. How do you...
So I think throughout the whole of the Bersin report, they talk a lot about design thinking. Mm-hmm. And in the design thinking world, it talks a lot about experimenting and almost letting people experiment with that matrix and say, okay, how's it working? Let's see whether it gives you the results you want in 6 months' time. Let us know. Doesn't mean that that's the new policy or you're not going to stop them trying it. But by calling something an experiment, it also means there's a timeline where we're expecting some feedback. We're expecting some analysis as a result of that. And we're not saying we're going to change the world until maybe that experiment's been tried in 3 or 4 different places, and then maybe we'll adopt the newest one. So if 6 people are using different, like we use Trello and somebody's using Slack, obviously in a 60-person organization, we don't want to have 6 different communication methods. But in your organizations, the larger companies, you might find which one gets traction, which one really works, let's experiment with them, and then let's go back with a policy or a decision that the best one gets adopted because these are the reasons why. Okay, Sonali? Can you actually say your company as well, so then that helps everybody in the room? Yeah.
I'm now working for Coty, but like 3 weeks I was working for AstraZeneca. We at AstraZeneca, we were on this huge journey of the future of the organisation. So we did a few things. One was that we created personas. So we looked across the organisation for typical roles that we've got, and the typical individual in those roles, and what's the experience they have with HR in their job. So it could be, I'm a GM for an organisation, I go for an external meeting, I come back, I've got to talk to the leaders about, there's a Q4 results, and then I've got to do my performance management online. So you're trying to get into the head of your customers. So that's one of the things that we did. The second thing that we did in order to, when we were coming out with how do we design the employee experience for onboarding or for performance management or returning from work over extended leave, what we ended up doing was working with subject matter, kind of the centers of expertise, but getting some of those people across the organization into a reference group. Okay. And so we worked collaboratively with them as we designed, kind of aspects of the employee experience journey. One of the things that we also found was that you could do is you could actually say to people, go and try that out. So to your point, Hazel,
experiments.
You kind of say, actually, that's a really great idea. You'll have a lot more agility and speed if you go ahead and do that, and you let us know what it's like, and come back to us and share your experience with the global team. Yeah. And so what you ended up having is a pilot.
And that's kind of seems a bit more appropriate, kind of, you know, if we're in a large organisation, say we're doing a pilot here, we're doing a pilot there, we're doing a pilot here, then we're going to come back and look at the results and see which one works better. And actually, that way you get people involved, you get them engaged, they feel part of the future, and you get to test out kind of new ways of working.
Great. Yeah, fantastic. More questions? Observations? Okay, here's what I'm going to get you to do while those questions bubble up. I'm actually going to get you to do a little bit of a group work. So I'm going to kind of like get you to spin round and maybe be in a 6. Something like that, 6, 7 people in a group so that you're actually in a little huddle, okay? And I want you to think about, just from what you've heard so far, what might be your biggest priorities for your organization moving forward. And I want you to be listening for trends, because I'm going to ask each group just to give us a little bit of feedback. You know, were there any trends that came out from this quick discussion about what your priorities are, and what were the biggest takeaways maybe that you had from this discussion? So swing your chairs around. If people need to run to the bathroom, do. If you need to disappear, do. But I'll ask you first of all a couple of questions. Fantastic energy, by the way, and good conversations. Maybe you were talking about something completely different. Have no idea. Yeah, but excellent. So best restaurant. Yeah, where was who did something good at the weekend? I don't know what was on your list. But let's actually start with the group that's in the back there, feeling like on the lower seats. You have to be quite tall to sit on those back seats. Or the comfy chairs, VIP, we just put them at the back, you see. What were the insights or trends, or what was the conversation and it gravitated towards? Nice and loud, so everybody, yeah?
So digital,
Yeah,
leadership, and engagement.
okay.
Sorry, we're hard of hearing.
Digital HR,
This glamorous lot, so let me stand up.
okay.
Do I have to start? So there are 3 priorities for our team. Leadership, digital HR, and for me, internal mobility and succession plan.
Okay.
And part of it is employee engagement.
Employee engagement piece from that. So leadership, digital HR, which hopefully gets rid of a lot of the time and paperwork and all of those other things that you get sucked into, and then being able to create mobility and that entire employee experience. Okay, fantastic, great. What about here? What were the trends and discussion? Leadership?
Priority.
Okay.
We talk about technology. How do we leverage that to bridge the gap? So we have different generations working together, and therefore how do we sort of align, use technology, leverage it to the most, and create a
So I think it
wholesome
was
work
more
culture?
around the injecting the change mindset,
Okay.
which goes across whether it's leadership or technology or any other processes, even performance management for that matter,
Okay.
which kind of drives the change that we all want to aspire for the world of future.
Okay, so there's some big mindset shifts that are going to need to happen, and that's not easy, is it? We're going to have to, there's a whole process of things that we need to be able to do. What about over here?
Okay, so not very different.
Jump up so they can hear you all the way over here.
So one was around employee engagement, especially around the millennial generation. So how
Okay.
do we,
Sorry,
how do we
guys.
face that they want to go back.
Uh-huh.
Our challenge specifically is around, given where the markets are and if the investments are going down, the financials, and the expectation is that you reach out to more people. Where does digital come in, and how do you tap into that to reach out to more people, even though there are cost pressures? Third one is of course around how to keep up with the competition and what's your differentiator in terms of beating the competition.
Okay, great. So that whole employee experience positioned in a way that beats the competition, so you get a bite at the talent that's out there from that millennial. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. And it's almost this challenge. You know, my budget's going down, but my expectation of engagement and learning is going up. So how do we balance those two things? Okay, what about this group here? I think we broke up into 2 at the end. What was this end of the 2? Yeah.
Actually, what we thought is
Jump up. Yeah.
what we thought is basically all are interlinked.
Okay.
Leadership, changing the mindset, and getting the organization of the future. So they're actually interlinked, and they're all equally important.
Right. So that becomes difficult, and everything's a priority, which means nothing's a priority. I remember Jim Collins telling me the word priority is singular. Yet we have 26 priorities, which actually creates loads of confusion. So how do we pull? I think this is one of my biggest takeouts from the Bersin report. It is so like this, that if you do this one, you've actually got to do that one, and then you really need to be doing this. How do you pull out an action plan and a roadmap to solve some of the problems in an order that will give you a result? And it's hard. So I do think you're going to be working on a few levers at the same time, but maybe figuring that out is difficult.
And I think
Erin.
that's what we talked about was actually just doing specific things. Maybe it is rolling out a handbook, which is called a culture document, which focuses on language that you want to see used within the organization, and bringing the management team together to use that language and drive that forward, and but doing things within a puzzle piece, so to speak, to kind of try and start the process.
Yeah. It's almost, you need to have really good, robust conversations around what's the lead domino. That if you actually hit this lead domino, it will have this effect down the road. And finding that in a lot of instances is extraordinarily difficult for you, and it probably needs to be tailored, because it's going to be different for each organization depending on what you've already got in place. What about over here?
So for us,
Michelle?
I think it was performance, top of mind, and the other thing was there's so much of disruption that's happening. So how do we find, in all the chaos, how do we really get our head around it? So leadership and mindset shifts to try and drive, whether it's a performance culture, employee engagement, adopting, digital, and getting the millennials who are adopting it. But then on the other hand, how do we get the leadership to adopt it really easily? Those were a couple of things on the top of mind for us.
Okay, fantastic. So a couple of questions. We feel there are some really gnarly problems, particularly to the Middle East, that we don't yet know how to solve. So we're wondering whether, some of you would be interested in being part of like advisory boards where we sit with clients or with prospects, people in the industry, and we actually try and solve, for example, the first one we'd love to look at is performance management. How do we create something that works with the cultures here, that understands the nuances of the market, that maybe has to go out and find a tool that would work with technology? How do we define what that needs to look like? So we don't have a solution, I'm being totally honest with you. We do certain things that we think are working, but we don't necessarily think we've got the entire solution. So I'm kind of like curious as to who would be interested in being in that kind of like advisory, experimental kind of like process to help us figure something out together. Brilliant. Okay, if I ask whoever invited you or whoever you typically work with in biz, can we just kind of like make sure Rachel knows, and we'll figure out how to host a round table and get this thing kind of kicked off to create some solutions for performance management.
Okay. Can I add something, please?
Please.
I think one of the things we should also look at, how do we scrap the existing performance? I think we made an industry out of it, all of us in the room, for HR representative, and it's time to scrap it. It's outlived itself.
Yeah. And that's a brave, and it's a brave thing, isn't it?
We're doing it, we're planning it.
Yeah. And it's a brave thing to say, do you know what, that no longer works. In fact, a gentleman that had to leave a little bit earlier on from one of our clients said, I'm reevaluating everything in the LMS. It's the legacy system is costing us a fortune, and it's not delivering a result. Yet it's hard to let go of, because whenever it was put in place, it was a big amount of money was spent, and everybody's holding on to that, but it's no longer giving you what you need. And so you need a good business case to be able to fight the other side. And I agree, at some point you've got to cut the oxygen from the previous performance management system and go to something that actually works for you and also for all the employees from that perspective. So that's great. Thank you for raising your hand. So final insights, Carol. Anything you want to share?
I would, go back to this theme of don't be afraid. The world is changing faster than it has ever changed before, and that's not going to slow down. And it is a challenge to keep up with what your employees need and what the organization needs. And so I would encourage all of you to be thought leaders and really strategic enablers in your business, which oftentimes HR and learning and development are seen as this boat anchor or cost center in the company that is so essential to today's business outcomes. And each of you has a role to play in being that strategic enabler. And part of that is just not being afraid to grab the challenge and step up and show your other leaders in the organization that you are willing to take some risks and drive the business, because you can.
Fantastic. Carol, thank you so much for being here and flying all the way here to spend time with us. And Greg, thank you as well for you coming. They've had an amazing week, with a few of those nights where it's been a little bit like, really, it's 3 o'clock and I'm awake already. So we appreciate the time difference and you being here. Thank you all of you that have come in for this morning's Trends Breakfast. Welcome to those that have come to Biz for the first time. If you're wearing trousers, we do expect you to go down the slide. And if you want to actually have a little bit more of a chat and a network now, we're going to have coffee and a little bit more of an opportunity to catch up. I know that you want to catch me. If you don't, we thank you very much for coming all the way out here, for those people staying for the Exonify Customer Day. And if you aren't staying for that and you want to know why you're not staying for that, you need to speak to Paddy or Matt, and they'll share a little bit more information. And so we really appreciate, hopefully you found this useful and fun. We look forward to inviting you to the next Trends Breakfast when we have a new update. Thank you so much.
One more thing before you do. Those of you that do have Exonify platforms, Arjun, if you could just put your hand up over there.
No, stand up, Achana.
So there will be a hot desk over there, so if any of you have any sort of best practice, technical, supporting questions around using the platform, she's going to be here during the break, before we head upstairs to the
Modern Learner.
Getting our rooms wrong, to go through customer stories. And those of you that would like to stay, that were wondering why you were invited, come grab your hand.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, ladies and gents.
Thank you.